16 minutes into this show, another woman will have been raped in India. That's according to official data from 2019, numbers that are believed to be greatly underestimated considering all the cases that don't get reported. I'm Anelise Borges, and on this episode of The Stream, we'll discuss why Indian women are at risk, the roadblocks to justice and accountability, and how to go about a different future. Across India, there is shock and horror over the brutal rape and murder of a young trainee doctor in West Bengal state. But the tragedy has been offering people there an opportunity to examine and discuss the alarming rates of violence against women, as well as the systemic failures that have allowed for such crimes to continue to happen throughout the years. Could this be a turning point? Or will it be remembered as yet another missed opportunity in the fight for justice and safety? Joining us today to discuss this are Rimjhim Sinha, a women's rights researcher in Kolkata, Dr. Subhrojyoti Bhowmik, alumni of the R.J. Carr Medical College in Kolkata, Trisha Shetty, women's rights activist and founder of SheSays, an NGO that works towards educating, rehabilitating, and empowering victims of sexual abuse, and Maroona Murmu, professor at Jadavpur University in Kolkata. Thank you all so much for being part of the stream today. We really appreciate having you guys. Rimjhim, let me start by asking you what you felt when you heard the news. I mean, were you in complete shock, or did you think this could have been me?
Absolutely, I was in shock. It was about an episode of victim blaming once again. It was an episode of severe violence once again, severe aggression in the form of violence that as a woman is very frightening and scary. So yes, that was the first reaction that I got to.
We're going to get more into detail about why I'm asking you whether or not you felt like this could have happened to you as well because of the rates, the alarming rates of violence against women in India. But Dr. Subhrojyoti, you know RG Carr Medical Center very well. There's quite a lot of talk about the fact that such a horrific incident should not have happened in such an institution. But since this incident happened, there's a lot of information about just the current state of affairs for medical workers in India and the conditions under which you guys work. No room to rest, abuse from patients, no protection. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
So thank you for having me on this show. Let me first say that R.G. Carr Medical College is a college for excellence anywhere in the world. It has a more than 100-year-old history. And yes, we are ashamed that this has happened in our alma mater. As a matter of fact, we do face as healthcare workers, as doctors, a lot of healthcare violence. Violence does take place across the length and breadth when we are functioning because the patients who come to us, they come to us at a very late stage, and sometimes agitated patient parties, they take out their entire frustration and anger on the doctors specifically, and there's a lot of physical violence which is reported. So yes, I have personally faced it when I was working in some institutions myself, because I've been a critical care doctor for more than 6 years in my career. And as you are aware that during critical care management, a lot of serious patients, they are admitted and some of them die, unfortunately, where results in a lot of frustration, and their anger comes out, unfortunately, on the doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers.
But it's obviously crazy that it gets to this point of violence. Maroona, how much more difficult is the situation for women medical doctors and other professions as well that are now once again confronted with the fact that they are not safe, not even in their workplace?
Yeah. Before I go on to talk about women in workplace, I must mention that about more than 85% of women work in unorganized sector. So over there, there's no mechanism through which you can actually check such a sexual offense. And coming to the condition of doctors, yeah, there is common restrooms, and there are a lot of problems considering the fact that there's a rule that they ought to work for 48 hours a week minimum, and not beyond a stage of 12 hours. But due to pressure of reference from various non-specialty hospitals, there's a lot of work pressure on doctors, especially on gynecological sections and medicines. So they have to work beyond the stipulated time of 12 hours a day. So, and the problem with washrooms, not every primary healthcare center have them. So women are in a pitiable condition in the workplace when it comes to medical profession.
Very vulnerable indeed. Trisha, perhaps the most disturbing element, I would say, in this story is how recurrent these horrific stories seem to be. I mean, you are a survivor yourself. You run an organization that fights for the rights of the victims. Can you tell us a little bit about the work of your organization, SheSays?
We started SheSays simply as a response to understanding that there is a gap. We have good laws in place. Yes, there are certain deficits even within our legal infrastructure that we need to further strengthen. But even just with the laws that we had in place, we realized that people did not have guaranteed access to justice because of systematic failure that we have seen time and again. I want to quote what our Supreme Court Chief Justice said over the last few days, where he said that the nation cannot wait for another rape and murder for real change to happen on ground. And he's called for national task force for the protection of doctors, and he's called for national protocols. What we see time and again, based on the work that we do on ground with SheSays, is that there is a severe lack of implementation. There is a lack of fear of the law. So, sadly, when people have knee-jerk reactions to when they hear instances of gruesome rape of this 31-year-old doctor, of a 3- and 4-year-old child, that protest is happening right now in parallel in Maharashtra, where they have been sexually abused. This, again, latest news that has come out. People jump towards, death sentence, without recognizing that this is the entire system that is failing women, that is failing children across India, and that till the time we don't look at it from a systematic reform, we're not going to ensure safety of women in India.
You bring a very important point, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. A local station in India went out to ask women how common they felt sexual assaults were. Take a look.
It's a kind of personal question, but have you yourself or somebody close to you ever told you about sexual assault happening to them?
I really wonder if a girl in India has not been exposed to a situation like that.
I have seen a lot of such cases. A girl, she was celebrating New Year's with her friend, so she took her to her house, and her friend was raped by this girl's father.
Get onto the train, whenever we get down from the train, people touch us inappropriately. My mom always has taught me that you should always protect your body. People move their hands just to touch some of our body parts. So this is like so crazy. This incident has happened 3 times in local with me. It just freezes my mind for some time, and I'm not able to think, and I'm really shook from this. There have been instances in everyone's close family circles or a close friend circle or something where somebody would have faced an assault. I think it's more important that these things are sensitized about, and at the same time equal measures are taken so that these things can stop at an immediate response.
Trisha, I don't know, it sounds like a war perpetrated on women's and children's bodies.
Undoubtedly. Let me take you back to what happened in 2017, where we had a case that came up in Unnao, where a 17-year-old Dalit girl was subject to gang rape and murder. And we saw the involvement of people from the current ruling administration in the crime that was perpetrated against her and her family. Let's also go back to Katwa, what happened in Kashmir, where a young girl, a Muslim girl, was subject to gruesome gang rape and murder. And again, we saw where we saw rallies being led by politicians calling for the protection of rapists. Right? So when we talk about crimes against women and children in India, we must have the temerity to acknowledge that it is worse for people from the OBC communities, from Dalit communities, from minority religions, that violence against their bodies is often sanctioned by the highest of offices. Let's talk about Gurmeet Ram Rahim Singh, It's a self-styled god who has been convicted for rape of multiple people, for murder of multiple people, and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. As of the latest report, he has spent 131 days in the past 13 months out of jail on parole. So what we're seeing is not just crimes against women and children being perpetrated, there's also another failure where there is impunity. That people who have close political affiliations, that are protected by the highest of offices, can get away with crimes. And again, this is something that all parties, political parties, are guilty of. And when you see that these cases come to the limelight where people are outraged and demanding for accountability, what we again see is political mudsliding, where one political party will say, don't look at what our state has done to, not ensure women have access to guaranteed safety and justice. Look at what the opposition has done to fail you. And then who suffers? It's we as women that end up suffering. And we don't see any of the sort of systematic reform. Forget systematic reform. We don't even see survivors get access to justice. And that's where women are being really let down in our country right now by our political powers.
It is quite, I imagine, frustrating for women indeed, because if everything happens keeps feeding this political discourse, but no action is taken. I mean, Rimjhim, do you agree that there are laws in place? I mean, many people remember the 2012 Delhi gang rape. There were laws implemented after that. The government created fast-track courts dedicated to rape cases, introduced death penalty for repeat offenders. But those laws and that legislation is simply not being applied here?
I think the first question that was rightfully raised here was of implementation, which is the primary factor. We have a lot of laws introduced, but it mostly stays on pen and paper and very inaccessible to the common people. The language of the law and the accessibility to understanding what the law and the legislation means is very hard for common people to, get a knowledge about. That's the first point. But other than that, I think there have been women police stations, there have been internal complaint committees that are ICCs, there have been stricter punishments, but the kind of mechanisms which have been employed after the incident had happened in 2012 do not work in the way they were supposed to be. There are supposed to be elected members into the ICC, but usually the members are selected. They are the people who are very close to the authority of the institution that it's meant for. Women police stations have officers who are not empathetic, because here we have to understand that we're talking about a mentality. It is not reserved for one certain gender. It's not like it's only for the male gender to have a patriarchal mentality here. It's also in women. It's in probably every person who has been brought up with that mentality in their families, in their social circle. So I think there is no idea, there is no mechanism to actually understand how the laws are being implemented. There is no survey system. There is no feedback system. There is no exchange of thoughts on how the legislation has been formed, what is the implementation doing, how is the implementation seen by the common people. And I think these are where the entire system lacks in protecting the so-called women that it is responsible for.
Dr. Subhrojyoti, would you say there's still a lot of cultural elements at play here, like Rimjhim was saying, in terms of blaming the victim for what she was wearing or the fact that she was out at night, for example?
So honestly, I think it is also a question of the mindset in which we grow up with. As Rimjhim was mentioning about the patriarchal society mindset. India had always been a very patriarchal society, and we have seen that in various states of our country, the female feticide rate is very high. So whether we like it or we don't like it, we have to figure it out that over the period of time, women have been subjected to have secondary citizenship, if I could use that word. Also a very important thing is the mindset that, that women are supposed to dress up in a certain way, walk and talk in a dress, and adhere to guidelines and adhere to a certain kind of behavior, which I think is wrong. And I think more than educating women about what their safety is, it is high time now that we start training our boys, and this comes from the kindergarten on, that they need to behave themselves. They need to actually behave, and also ensure women's safety at every possible opportunity. I think there is where we are failing as a society.
You bring a very important point. I want to share with our viewers now some of the staggering figures in terms of sexual violence in India, and then ask you guys about how and what can be done in terms of fixing this monumental problem. Take a look.
87. This is the number of rape cases India records every day on average. The latest compilation by the NCRB reveals India registered 31,677 rape cases during 2021. Across the country, nearly 10% of the total cases had minors as survivor.
10% of the victims are children, the survivors are children. Trisha, I mean, that speaks volumes about raising people the wrong way, right? And I believe your organization has figures that 51% of the victims of child abuse are boys. So how do you go about then telling them that is wrong to sexually abuse other people?
So it's 51.4% out of the population of children that get subject to child sexual abuse that are young boys. Now, the thing to remember is upwards of 99% in these cases, 90%, sorry, is someone closely known to the child. So it's not the rhetoric of a stranger in a dark alley, but when the rapist or the person abusing a child is a close relative, is when the concept of shame gets introduced, unfortunately, where people don't report the crime. So let's just talk about, the two instances I mentioned earlier, Unnao and Katwa. We saw national outrage and protests. And again, what the government did, it said, okay, you know what? We're going to introduce death penalty for anyone who gang rapes a child under the age of 12, which has now with the new law been increased to under the age of 18. That was imposed in 2018. However, what you actually see on ground is just a 3% conviction rate when it comes to crimes against children of sexual nature. You have only had 28 cases tried every single year. The latest data says there's been a 96% of increase in sexual violence against children between the period of 2016 to 2022.
96% increase, wow.
Yes, so we're dealing with a pandemic of sexual abuse against children by perpetrators closely known to the child. And having worked on ground, I will tell you, even just convincing parents to send their child to a therapist to get mental care is next to impossible. And you know who reports these crimes? It's people from the lowest strata of society. It's the poor who actually do go and report because they don't have the concept of societal shame. What happens at home stays at home. They are the brave people who actually go and seek access to justice and fight the good fight for us all. People from upper middle class, rich sections of society don't even report these crimes.
Maroona, do you think that a different future for India goes through precisely that, reporting and asking for accountability, whatever the consequences?
Before responding to that, I would say that women who come from marginal sections of the society, the Dalits and the Adivasis, the cases do not get reported and they do not get public attention as well. We are talking about the 2012 case, but an equally heinous case happened on February 2018. A girl, 21-year-old tribal girl in Kushmandi, was raped and she laid on the field for 18 hours, and it was described by the doctors that a sharp instrument was inserted into her private parts and her intestine came out. Nobody talked about this girl, Adivasi girl. And on the very night when women were reclaiming the night on the 14th, another Adivasi girl, Priyanka Hasta, she had stepped out of her house and she was found dead within 100 meters. So the thing is that it's also the people that protests are organized for. It's not that everybody gets the same sort of public attention because of their social location.
Very important
That is also a question that...
Very important point. Rimjhim, this public outrage has been serving at least for Indians to discuss this and to talk about it. But how do you go about fixing this major problem? How, in your opinion, will India build a different future for its women and children?
I think the first point that needs to be considered is we all need to believe this and tell this to ourselves, especially if we are a woman, if we belong to the marginalized gender communities, if we identify as queer, if we identify as transgender, if we identify as non-binary, and every other part of the spectrum. I think we should realize that it is not our fault if an incident happens with us. This is very important in the first place to realize. And on the other hand, when we talk about the mentality, we have to put forward structural demands which change the system that is in place. If we do not talk about the change in the mindset, the change in the entire idea of representation, the entire idea of understanding what gender means and what gender discrimination means, what is empathizing with a gender, what is apathy, I think we will never get to understand what is in play. For that, I think there should be a course on gender, just like we have a course on science, just like we have a course on history, right from the school curriculums. I think there should be safe transport, public transport available for women and every other marginalized community who has to take the night in accordance to go to their workplaces. I think there should be safer restrooms, secured restrooms for people who are employed in night duties. The workplaces that employ women need to have creches so that women are not always blamed that they don't have enough concentration, they do not pay enough heed to their work, they do not pay enough heed to their importance. There are a lot of pressure points which are on women, which are on queer people, which are on marginalized genders, which continuously keep on going in their mind. They are continuously under stress that they have to prove they can do it. They have to prove that they're worth it. These things should be changed, that the ICC should be made accountable so that they cannot form an official statement and just say it out loud that the case was denied because the accused denied the circumstances that the survivor reported. These things need to stop. And for this, we need people to come up with structural, informed decisions right from the beginning of the schooling, right from the beginning of education.
Very important point. Dr. Subhrojyoti, how, as a man yourself, how do you go about educating the men around you and the boys around you in order to, I don't know, help the women as well feel safe and say something if they see something when there is wrong being done?
To answer your question, I would say that, again, I will go back to early schooling, and illiteracy is a very important aspect. So we need curriculum changes in our school. We also need ethics to be involved, morality and ethics as an important component of schooling, where we have to respect in every individual choices. We have to bring in gender respect. This is extremely important, and this could be not only for the female gender but for also the LGBTQ community. If you see, the violence against LGBTQ community is also alarming in this country. So we need to empower, we need to be tolerant to people's choices, that we are an independent country. People can wear, talk and do things which they like. And if just one small thing before I close, I would say to ensure the safety of doctors at our workplace, it's extremely important. We need to undertake background checks who deal with women and children on a day-to-day basis. And lastly, I would say that employee appraisals, you know, in education institutions, we always do appraisals from, it is a one-way affair. It is not a 360-degree affair of appraisal of how the association is between the head of the department.
Yes, all very
and
important measures. Unfortunately, we are out of time, Doctor. I do appreciate the points, but I guess the conclusion of your talk there is more tolerance, but also justice and accountability to begin addressing this very important issue. Rimjhim, Dr. Subhrojyoti, Trisha and Maroona, thank you all so much for being part of the stream today. And thank you all for watching. Do stay in touch with us online. You can send us your questions and suggestions with the hashtag or the handle AJStream, and we'll look into them. Take care, and I'll see you soon.